Namaskar. Namaskar, dear friends. Today we are happy to have Dr. Vibhuti Shaha. He will do presentations on this neurological manifestation of HIV infections. And all you are requested to listen the sessions carefully. And at the end of the sessions, Dr. Saha may ask you few questions. So please be prepared. Take down few notes if necessary, so that at the end of the session we can discuss a few of the questions, and you can also ask a few questions if you want to understand more something. Sir.
Good evening, everybody. COVID has made us far away from people. So normally we like to be with you, discussing within a classroom, interacting and taking questions from you. That is the normal way we want it. But this is a new normal, so we have to go by that. So basically what we'll be doing is we'll be discussing briefly what happens in HIV infection in the nervous system. If you all of you know that the basic things of the nervous system, that we have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And the central nervous system, we have the brain, the spinal cord, and in the peripheral nervous system we have the nerves, as well as we have and also we have a somatic nervous system and a parasympathetic and parasympathetic, that is autonomic nervous system. And if we all of you know that the brain and spinal cord, they basically develop from the ectoderm, and from which we have progenitor cells, and from the cells we get some go to the pathway of forming the neurons, neuronal cells, and some of them go to the formation of the non-neuronal cells, which we call microglia and all those things. So if you recall your basic knowledge of the nervous system, in the brain, we have the gray matter outside, which composes about 40%, and the white matter inside, which is about 60%. The gray matter is mainly formed by the neuronal cells, and the white matter is formed by the fibers. And if you go by the development, when someone reaches the age of around 20, the brain's gray matter development is complete. And in the middle age, the white matter development is complete. So this is how our brain develops. So if you think about the neuropathology of HIV, then can we have the first slide, Dr. Jamatia? Dr. Jamatia? Yeah, please show the first slide. Can you just, yeah. So we can have a variety of neurological conditions in HIV. Some may be due to direct effect of the HIV virus or its products, and some due to the opportunistic infections and neoplasms. So we'll be discussing them. Now we have discussed the cells which have in the brain, and we have the blood vessels also, and around the blood vessels we have the macrophage cells, which engulf the things which are toxic to us. So we have what are the cells which are affected? The perivascular macrophages, the microglial cells, which I have told you. And what is happening? There are lesions in the white matter, as well as there is affection of the neurons. So both the white matter as well as the gray matter are affected. And who are doing this? You know that HIV virus has so many of its enzymes and proteins. So this GP120 and TAT, what they do, they basically release neurotoxins from the macrophages and the astrocytes. And we have sanctuaries. We have wildlife sanctuaries where the wild animals, they are resting very safely, having food, and they're enjoying their normal life. Similarly, the brain provides a sanctuary to the HIV virus. So it's a safe haven for the HIV virus. Okay. So can we go to the next slide, Dr. Jamatia? Next slide, please. Yeah. So if you look at the neurological involvement, frequency of the neurological involvement, you'll see any patient with HIV infection will have some degree of the neurological affection. And what can the affection be? You can have the abnormal CSF in up to 90% of patients. The CSF may show more cells. Normally in the CSF we have 0 to 5 cells, but you can have more cells in up to 50 to 65% of the patients. Protein may be raised. Normally we do have 40-50 milligram percentage of protein, whereas it can go up in HIV infections because of the HIV itself, or maybe due to other infections. And if you look at the antibody, up to 90% of the patients you can get the HIV antibody. And if you look for the RNA, you can have viral RNA in up to 75%. So you can see there's a wide extent of involvement in the neurological system in the HIV infection. Next slide, please. So when we divide the complications into HIV infections, some may be due to HIV itself and some may be due to opportunistic infections. So what are the conditions which are due to HIV itself? We have acute aseptic meningitis. Usually that's in the acute HIV infection. Or you can have a chronic meningitis. We'll be discussing chronic meningitis in detail. You can have HIV encephalopathy, which is also previously known as AIDS dementia. Nowadays we say HIV-associated dementia. You can have vacuolar myelopathy. We'll be discussing that. You can have affection of the peripheral nervous system, as you said, peripheral neuropathy, which can be sensory. Or you can have direct affections of the muscles, which is known as myopathy. This is directly due to HIV. And what can be the opportunistic infections? You can have cryptococcal meningitis, very common. All of you know the name of cryptococcal meningitis, and you must have seen cases also. You can have cerebral toxoplasmosis. You can have CMV retinitis as well as encephalitis caused by the cytomegalovirus. You can have another condition known as progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, where is affection of the white matter of the brain. In short, we tell this as PMLE. We'll be discussing this. You can have primary central nervous system lymphoma. And common things, you can have tuberculosis or syphilis. We'll be discussing all of them. Next slide, please. So what we do, we take a syndromic approach. What is a syndrome? Syndrome is a constellation of symptoms and signs. So that is called a syndrome. So what syndromes you can have? You can have a chronic meningitis, which is due to maybe cryptococcosis, tuberculosis, or syphilis. You can have focal cerebral lesions. That means there's a lesion in somewhere in the brain, and that produces its effects, maybe motor effects or sensory effects. The causes can be toxoplasmoencephalitis, primary CN. Sorry, please go back to the previous slide. It can be primary CNS lymphoma. Go down, please. Yeah, thank you. So it can be toxoplasmoencephalitis. It can be primary CNS lymphoma. It can be progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. It can be tuberculoma in the brain. So these called focal cerebral lesion. That means there's a focus in the brain, some part of the brain, and you see the effects of that in the system. There can be cognitive decline. What is cognition? That is, suppose every one of us, I'm taking a class. I know that I have a responsibility to reach my lessons to all of you, and you have a responsibility to listen to me, understand, and then we can interact. So we have intellectual functions to decide what we do and what not to do. This is a cognition. An HIV infection can cause cognitive decline. There can be peripheral neuropathy, affection of the peripheral nervous system, or there can be affection of the spinal cord, which is known as myelopathy. So all these syndromes we can have in HIV disease, and we will be discussing cases. Next slide, please. So we have been talking about the syndromes. All of you know this. So how to define meningitis? By meningitis is inflammation of the meninges. So patient has headache, fever, nausea, vomiting, maybe alteration of consciousness. And on clinical examination, you get stiffness of the neck. You remember the Karnik signs and the Brudzinski signs. I think you can recall. Karnik signs, when you're flexing the neck, you get stiffness, resistance to flexing the neck. Brudzinski sign, you are flexing the leg. And the causes can be cryptococcosis, tuberculosis, or syphilis. All these can cause chronic meningitis. Coming to focal cerebral lesions, that means there is a focus in the brain. So how is it manifested? There is a headache, and there is a focal neurological deficit, maybe hemiplegia when there's affection of the motor cortex, maybe hemianopia, that means you can't see in part of the eye with part of the visual field when there's a lesion is the occipital cortex. And you can have seizures, convulsions when you have lesions in the motor area of the brain. What can be the causes? Causes of toxoplasmosis, tuberculoma, cystosarcosis, and progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. Coming to encephalitis. Encephalitis is infection of the brain, affection of the brain. So there are alteration in the cognition, impairment in the cognition. The patient may have psychiatric features, and there may be alteration of consciousness. All of you must have seen patients with encephalitis. Cytomegalovirus is a cause of encephalitis in HIV disease, and HIV itself can also cause encephalitis. You can have dementia. What are the components of dementia? There is a cognitive impairment, that means intellectual impairment. Psychomotor slowing, that means the patient's thinking process has become slow. And behavioral disturbance. The patient is behaving abnormally, which he was not doing previously. This can be caused by HIV. We'll be showing you a case later on. And finally, there can be myelitis, affection of the spinal cord, which may cause weakness of the lower limbs, which is known as paraparesis, sensory changes in the lower limbs, and sphincter disturbance, that is bowel and bladder disturbance. And this can be due to either CMV or HIV itself. Next slide, please. Now, I'm very much fond of telling stories. So I'll be telling you some real life stories, the patients which we really saw in past. So my first patient, a 34-year-old Mr. M, he was brought to our OPD. He was working in Mumbai and he fell ill there. He was diagnosed with pulmonary tuberculosis and completed anti-tubercular treatment. And he tested positive for HIV. Remember, this is an old patient. Nowadays, whenever someone is testing positive for tuberculosis, we routinely test them for HIV. But that was not a dictum that time. Anyway, the doctor who was treating him later on thought of testing for HIV, and he was found to be positive. And he had a very low CD4 count of 97. And so the doctor rightly put him on cotrimoxazole prophylaxis. Those days, antiretroviral therapy were not available freely. Government program was not working. So people who wanted that, they needed to buy that, and the person couldn't buy them. So he came to us complaining of low-grade fever and headache for last 3 weeks. And when we examined him, we could not get any focal neurodeficit. So this is a global cerebral syndrome. Headache, fever, without any localizing neurological sign. Next slide, please. So how do you evaluate them? So when you have a patient presenting with headache, which is severe and seropositive, and if there is evidence of immunodeficiency in the form of either patient has oral candidiasis or weight loss is there, or the CD4 is less than 200, you see whether the patient has focal seizures or signs or fever or meningeal signs. If there are focal signs, there might be some localizing lesion. So you go for a contrast enhanced CT scan or MRI. Remember, in HIV practice, never go for a plain CT or MRI. It may not be showing you many things. So whenever you are planning to do a contrast cerebral brain imaging, go for contrast enhanced MRI or CT scan. So if you get ring enhancing lesions, then you can treat them for toxoplasmosis encephalitis. Or if this is normal, or the patient has fever and meningitis, then you go for a CSF analysis. Remember, before doing for a CSF study, you must exclude that the patient does not have papilledema. So ophthalmoscopy has to be done. And after you have excluded the patient doesn't have papilledema, that means the CSF pressure is not very much raised, then only you put the needle. And once you put the needle, you look for the pressure, how many drops. Normally it comes as 1 drop per second. So you can see how is a CSF pressure. And then you send it for the cell type and cell count, protein, glucose, ADA, gram stain and culture, and also for the special pathogens, you look for the India-ink preparation, look for the VDRL, and for tuberculosis, you look for acid-fast bacilli, CBNAT, and Bactec mycobacterial culture. And if you're thinking of fungus, you do a fungal culture also. So this is how we approach a patient who is presenting with a fever and headache. Next slide, please. So cryptococcosis is a common cause of chronic meningitis. How the patient comes to you? The patient can come with pneumonia or retinitis or skin disease or disseminated disease. That this is uncommon. The commonest presentation is meningitis. The patient will come to you by telling that I have headache, I'm not feeling well, he will be not be responding well to your question. So this is how they present. So we call this a subacute meningitis, not acute meningitis, subacute. Or there can be meningoencephalitis, that means features of meningitis as well as encephalitis. That means his higher functions are not well, fever, malaise, headache, lethargy, and mental changes. And less commonly, you can find changes in the vision. They can get neck stiffness. Sometimes, less than 1/3 of the cases, you can get cranial nerve deficit. Mainly, you get the lateral rectus palsy because of the sixth nerve damage. You know, the sixth nerve travels a long route through the base of the brain, and once there's a raised intracranial pressure, the sixth nerve can be damaged, and this can cause a lateral rectus paralysis of the lateral rectus, and in 10% of the cases, you can get seizures, convulsions. But you usually don't get any focal neurodeficit unless there is a cryptococcoma. Next slide, please. This is a patient who is showing, you can see this, showing the nodules in the skin because of this cryptococcus skin nodules. Next slide. So how do you diagnose? You do a CSF study. What do you find? The CSF is under high pressure, that is more than 1 drop per second. The protein is high, sugar is low because the cryptococci has consumed the sugar, and you can get few mononuclear cells. All of you know that normally the CSF shows 0 to 5 cells. In cryptococcal meningitis, you don't get many cells. Maybe you're getting 10, 15, 20, not much more normally. And more serious the cryptococcus is, less in the number of cells in the CSF. Remember that. And how do you diagnose? You do Indian preparation, which can be positive in 75% of cases. And you do a fungal culture in Seborrhoe's dextrose agar medium, which can be positive in 95 to 100% of cases. And if you have facility of cryptococcal antigen, it can be positive in up to 95% of cases. And if you do a CT scan or MRI, you remember that you must be doing a contrast-enhanced CT scan or MRI. It's either normal or it can show raised intracranial tension. There may be minimal meningeal enhancement, or there can be enlargement of the ventricles, or sometimes in advanced cases, because of the cryptococci has been there for a long time, there can be obstructive hydrocephalus. That means obstruction in the flow of the CSF and the ventricles, they dilate. So that is known as obstructive hydrocephalus. That is more common in tuberculosis than in cryptococcal meningitis. Next slide, please. This is a beautiful slide. You can see the blue colored is the India ink, and you can see the white things. The center, you have a circular thing, that is the cryptococcus itself. And around that, the whitish halo is a capsule. They have a polysaccharide capsule. So this capsule is a capsulated organism. This is classical of cryptococcus. Next slide, please. So, if you think of the causes of chronic meningitis, the common culprits are cryptococcus, tuberculosis, and syphilis. And pneumococcus can cause acute meningitis. So how do you differentiate them? By the CSF parameters. In cryptococcosis, the CSF cells are raised. As I said, they are raised, but they can be normal. Remember, the more severe the cryptococcosis is, less is the cell count. How is the biochemistry? The protein is elevated and sugar is low because, as I said, the cryptococcus consumes the sugar of the CSF. And the microbiological test, the India ink preparation can be positive, or your antigen test can be positive, or if you do a Seborrhoe's dextrose agar culture, it may get a positivity in up to 95% of the cases. Coming to tuberculosis, all of you know, you have been seeing this during MBBS days also. You get a lymphocytic things, and you may get up to 100. So in tubercular meningitis, the number of cells, cell count is more, maybe up to 100, maybe up to 1,000 also. The protein is raised, and the sugar is maybe normal or maybe slightly low. And if you do a CBNAT test, it can be positive, and culture test can occasionally become positive. We'll discuss this later again. Pneumococcosis, this causes acute meningitis. So if you think of the causes of acute meningitis, the common two causes are pneumococcus and meningococcus. So pneumococcus is more common in syphilic HIV background or in more of the patients. So you can get neutrophilic leukocytosis, more than 1,000 cells. Most of them are neutrophils. The protein is very high and the sugar is very low because, again, this pneumococcus consumes the sugar. And if you do a gram stain, you can see gram-positive diplococci. The classically pneumococcus is gram-positive diplococci. And if you do a culture, you can get a growth of the pneumococcus. And syphilis, what do you see? Syphilis also causes chronic meningitis. There also it's lymphocytic, and the cell count is not much more, maybe 30, 40, 50, 60, like that. Not like tuberculosis, so when you get in hundreds. The protein is little raised, sugar is almost near normal, and the CSF VDRL will be positive in up to 75% of cases. So that's how you diagnose syphilitic meningitis. And remember, as I said, you before doing lumbar puncture, you do a fundus examination. Be sure the patient does not have papilledema. The CSF pressure is not very raised, because if you put a needle, then there can be herniation, cerebral herniation, and the patient may die. So before putting a needle, please make sure to examine the fundus and exclude papilledema before you put the needle. Next slide, please. So how do you treat cryptococcal meningitis? There are many recommendations. The best recommendation is 1 week of amphotericin B plus flucytosine. Unfortunately, we don't have flucytosine. Or you can use fluconazole with flucytosine. That's again not available. So what we are doing is a third option, that is 2 weeks of amphotericin B with fluconazole. So 2 weeks of amphotericin B in a dose of 0.75 to 1 milligram per kg per day with fluconazole 1200 milligram. This is given for 2 weeks. Then we go to the consolidation phase. The patient is doing well, the headache has decreased. Now we go to the consolidation phase. What we give in consolidation phase? We give fluconazole 800 milligram daily, or in as per body weight is 6 to 12 milligram per kg body weight. And this we give for the 8 weeks. This is followed by a maintenance phase where you give a fluconazole 200 milligram daily. And when do you start antiretroviral therapy? 4 to 6 weeks after starting the antifungal therapy. Why not immediately? Because already the CSF is under increased pressure and the patient is having a low CD4 count. So if you start antiretroviral therapy immediately, there can be immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome and the patient may be in a lot of trouble. So remember, after 4 to 6 weeks of starting antifungal therapy, you will be starting antiretroviral therapy. Next slide, please. Then this is followed by secondary prophylaxis. What does it mean? The patient has been treated for cryptococcal meningitis. He has completed the induction therapy, consolidation therapy, and then we give a secondary prophylaxis. How do we give that? We give fluconazole 200 milligram per day. How long do we give that? Till the CD4 count remains at more than 200 cells per cubic millimeter for 6 months in a person who has been started on ART. So I repeat, you are giving an intensive phase of 2 weeks, amphotericin B with fluconazole, followed by consolidation phase of 8 weeks with 800 milligram of fluconazole. Then you go to a maintenance phase where you give fluconazole 200 milligram daily, and that is continued as secondary prophylaxis till you have already started the patient on ART after 3 to 4 weeks of starting antifungal therapy. And when the patient is stable on antiretroviral therapy, the CD4 has increased, it is more than 200 millimeter for 6 months, then you can stop this secondary prophylaxis with fluconazole. Next slide. There is a concept of primary prophylaxis. I'll be quickly going to this. Primary prophylaxis is basically, people who have low CD4 count, they are very prone to suffer from cryptococcosis. So people who have a CD4 count less than 100 and maybe less than 200, this is a WHO recommendation, but this is not it in our country recommendation, then you go for a screening for the cryptococcal antigen. So the person has a CD4 count less than 100, not symptomatic for cryptococcosis, you do a cryptococcal antigen screening in the blood. If the blood is positive, and then you do a CSF study to see whether the person is not having CNS cryptococcosis, then the patient is put on a prophylaxis of fluconazole. Or if you don't have access to cryptococcal antigen screening, then also if the CD4 is less than 100, you may consider for fluconazole prophylaxis to prevent occurrence of cryptococcosis. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. But remember, when you have somebody with low CD4 count and the cryptococcal antigen is positive, then you evaluate the patient for presence of symptoms and signs of meningitis, and if possible, do a CSF study and CSF cryptococcal antigen assay or the Indian test to see if the patient is having active cryptococcal disease. So if this patient has active cryptococcal disease, that is CSF is showing presence of cryptococcus, then he needs a treatment for cryptococcal meningitis. There is no question of prophylaxis. But if this cryptococcal antigen positive patient, he is not symptomatic of meningitis and the same CSF is normal, then you can go for a prophylaxis to prevent occurrence of cryptococcal disease in the future. So this is primary prophylaxis as per WHO recommendation, but not yet in our country guideline. Next slide, please. Raised intracranial tension. That's again a problem. Whenever you're treating cryptococcal cases, many of the patients can die of high CSF intracranial pressure. So whenever a patient of cryptococcal meningitis causing complaint of severe headache, you do a repeated lumbar puncture. And see, normal CSF pressure is up to 180 centimeter water. But if it is more than 250 centimeters of water, or if you cannot measure this, normally you have 1 drop per second. But if you have 2 drops per second, that means it's high. So then you have to do for a repeated CSF drainage, maybe 3-5 weeks, to relieve the brain CSF high pressure. And there's no role of corticosteroids. Next slide. How to monitor them? If your patient, you are treating him or her for cryptococcal meningitis is improving, then you don't need to repeat LP. But if the symptoms or signs are persisting or new symptoms appear after 2 weeks of treatment, then you do a repeat lumbar puncture to see whether the CSF pressure is low or the CSF is still showing cryptococci. Remember, cryptococci will be present in the CSF even after 2 weeks. But if the patient is symptomatic, that means after 2 weeks of therapy, the patient is still having severe headache, then you may either consider in continuing the cryptococcus treatment for another 1 week, or you can send the CSF for the culture to see if there is resistance of fungus. Though this is not very common, but normally what you do, even after 2 weeks the symptoms are persisting, then you may consider, and the CSF pressure is high, then you consider that continuing the cryptococcal treatment for another 1 week. Next slide. And remember, these patients are very susceptible to toxicity to amphotericin B. What are the toxicities? It can cause kidney damage, acute kidney injury, or it can cause hypokalemia. Potassium may go down. So whoever is getting amphotericin B must be hydrated adequately, and if needed, they must be supplemented with potassium to avoid hypokalemia, and regularly serially check urea and creatinine to see whether there is kidney damage. How do you define treatment failure in cryptococcal disease? That means the patient has deteriorated in spite of treatment, or even after 2 weeks of treatment, appropriate treatment, the patient is not responding. Then, as I said, what you do, you do a repeat lumbar puncture, and then you you continue the CSF amphotericin B treatment for another 1 week to see whether it is responding or not. Or sometimes, if it does not work, it may consider for voriconazole, but that's normally we don't do so. In a patient who has not responded well to 2 weeks of treatment, you can extend the treatment of amphotericin B for another 1 week. Next slide, please. Now coming to another common condition, not very common, but another rather common condition is neurosyphilis. What are the varieties? You can get meningeal neurosyphilis, headache, fever, photophobia, meningismus, seizures, focal findings, and cranial pulses. Or you can have tabes dorsalis, that means affection of the posterior column of the spinal cord, where the patient complains of lancinating pains, paresthesia, delayed tendon reflexes are reduced, and the pupillary response is lost. Or you can have general paresis of Insane, where the person will have loss of memory, dementia, change in the personality, and the loss of pupillary reflexes. Or there can be meningovascular syphilis, which can present with strokes or myelitis. And there can be ocular syphilis in the form of iritis, uveitis, and optic neuritis. You know, there is a term known as Argyll-Robertson pupil. That means accommodation reflex is present but light reflex is lost. So that is ARP, which can occur in neurosyphilis. And this can occur in any CD4 count. Next slide, please. How do you diagnose? In the serum, we do a VDRL, and anything, any titer more than 1 in 8 is positive. Or you can do FTAVs if available. Remember that you can get false negative VDRL in 5 to 10% of cases of Tabes dorsalis and GPI. And more important is doing the study in the CSF, where the protein is slightly raised, cell count is slightly raised, and the VDRL is positive. But remember, it is positive in up to 2/3 of the cases, that is around 65% of cases. But if the CSF VDRL is positive, you are very definite that the person is suffering from neurosyphilis. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. And how do you treat? You treat with aqueous penicillin G, crystalline penicillin. How much? 3 to 4 million units, 4-hourly IV for 10 to 14 days. So remember, the treatment is crystalline penicillin, 3 to 4 million units, 4-hourly intravenously for 10 to 14 days. To that, you can add benzathine penicillin G, 3 million units once a week for 3 doses after the IV course, but this is not mandatory. But remember, you must give crystalline penicillin. There are other options of procaine penicillin and probenecid, but best option is penicillin. But unfortunately, availability of penicillin is a problem. So all of you, whoever are working in the states, be tight to make sure that penicillin is available. And how do you follow up? Repeat the CSF study every 6 months. What you will find, the CSF WBC count will be reduced in 6 months, and it will become CSF will become normal in 12 months. If it does not become normal, then your treatment has not possibly worked so well. Next slide, please. Tuberculosis. Very, very common. In fact, the commonest nervous disease condition what we see is tuberculosis. So how do they present? They can present with fever, loss of alertness, headache, meningismus, that is neck stiffness, and focal deficits. If you have tuberculoma, there will be a focal neurological deficit. CD4 count can happen anywhere, but usually there's a less than 350. But remember, tuberculosis disease can happen anywhere in the HIV disease. What do you see in the CSF? CSF, it can be normal in only small percent. Most of the patient is abnormal. What is the abnormality? The protein is raised. The WBC count, as you said, maybe 100 to thousands, and most of these are mononuclear cells. The glucose is slightly reduced, 20 to 40. We do ADA test, and AD has a sensitivity of 81% and specificity of 86%. So, if the immediate is adenosine deaminase test is available, you have the cutoff values in different parts testing as per the testing system. It has a sensitivity of around 81%, but specificity of 86%. Or you can do a AFB smear and culture, and also do a CBNAT. And remember, when you are doing a CBNAT study, it can pick up when you have 10 colony forming units per milliliter of CSF. So it's very sensitive. If you compare to AFB smear, then AFB smear detects when there are 100 bacilli per milliliter, whereas this CBNAT can pick up when there are 10 colony forming units per milliliter. So CBNAT is a very important tool in diagnosis of CNS tuberculosis. Next slide. If you do a chest X-ray, you can have evidence of tuberculosis in 50%. MANTU test will be positive in up to 20 to 30%. But remember, when the advanced HIV disease, the MANTU may be negative. And if you do a CT scan, you can get intracerebral lesions in 50 to 70% of the cases. We'll be showing you some photographs. Next slide. In radiology, you can get either multiple or single solitary lesions. We'll be showing photographs. Or you can get big solitary lesions known as tuberculous abscesses. Or you can get hydrocephalus, basilar meningitis, or cerebral infarction. We will be showing you some slides. Next slide, please. You can see there are lesions, rounded lesions. You can see rounded tuberculomas, very clear rounded tuberculomas. Next slide. You can see there's a rounded tuberculoma in brain, in the medulla. Next slide. You can see 2 tuberculomas in the brain. Next slide. These are nodular lesions. You can see there are multiple nodular lesions. Tuberculoma, and this is a tuberculous abscess. So you can get a tuberculoma, nodular lesions, tubercular abscess. And next slide. Next slide, please. Or you can see meningeal enhancement. You can see there is a meningeal enhancement in the lower part. So there is a meningeal enhancement. So you can have so many types of things. Next slide, please. Yeah. So now we come to another patient. Mr. A, he had this very small shop in Kolkata and he had very high risk sexual behavior. He was losing weight, keeping unwell. Suddenly he developed seizures and weakness in one half of the body. Now he was admitted to a hospital, another hospital, and CT scan of the brain was done. And you can see that. Next slide, please. What you can see a ring enhancing lesions with perilesional edema. The edema is in black, right? So there's a CT scan showing ring enhancing lesion with perilesional edema. Next slide. This MRI of the brain, T2 weighted images, this is showing edema. The white is edema. Remember, in T1, the CSF is black, and in T2, the fluid becomes white. So this is T2 weighted image in MRI. Next slide. You can see now ring enhancing lesions and the perilesional edema black. So this is T1. Remember, the water looks black in T1 and white in T2. So that's how we differentiate between T1 and T2 images in MRI. So this is a ring enhancing lesion, multiple ring enhancing lesion with perilesional edema. Next slide. You can see here also ring enhancing lesion with edema. Next slide. So this is toxoplasma encephalitis. Who gives us toxoplasma? Cats. Cats, they carry toxoplasma in the gut. So basically, many of us have been infected with toxoplasma and this remains asymptomatic. But if our immunity goes down, as it happens in HIV disease, there's a reactivation of toxoplasmosis and you can have a disseminated infection. And how do they present? They present with focal cerebral lesion. So headache, focal neurodeficit, confusion, and fever. And how do you diagnose? You do a CT scan or MRI with contrast. I told you always do a scan with contrast. Never do a non-contrast study. So you can get multiple ring enhancing lesions which can be present in the basal ganglia or in the brainstem or in the cerebellum. Remember, you have to compare this with CNS lymphoma, which is usually more often a single and which is present more commonly near the ventricles. And tuberculosis are already shown. Tuberculoma can occur anywhere in the brain. And if you do IgG antitoxoplasma antibody, it will be positive in more than 95% of the cases. And the treatment is very dramatic. That's the beauty of diagnosing toxoplasmosis. You diagnose toxoplasmosis, start the treatment, and the patient will show clinical response in 2 weeks. And the CT scan or MRI will show improvement in 3 weeks. Next slide, please. So as I said, what you see in the radiologically, multiple enhancing lesions and there edema around the lesions, and also there may be mass effect on the basal ganglia or on the gray-white matter interface of the hemispheres. Remember, this disease can happen many areas, though they prefer the basal ganglia or gray-white matter interface of the cerebral hemispheres, but any part of the brain can be affected, and you can get solitary lesion, single lesion in approximately 15% of cases. And they show hypodense in a CT scan, and they show ring enhancing lesion as we have already shown you. Next slide. And remember, MRI is more. So if you have facility of doing MRI is more likely to pick up toxoplasmosis, and we'll be showing MRI slide next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is CT scan. This CT scan, you can see ring enhancing lesions in both sides, right side as well as the left side, and there are also a lot of edema. Next slide. Yeah. This is a patient of ours. You can see there are multiple ring enhancing lesions with perilesional edema. This patient presented with hemiparesis, fever, headache, and hemiparesis, and HIV positive. And we started him in treatment of toxoplasmosis. And I tell you, in 2 weeks, the patient started walking with a stick. And we repeated the brain imaging after 3 weeks. Most of the lesions have melted. They melt like snow. That's the beauty of toxoplasmosis. And is one of the very satisfying treatment in HIV medicine. Next slide. So how do you treat? You give sulfadiazine with pyrimethamine. The doses are mentioned, and with that you give folinic acid to avoid toxicity. But unfortunately, and this treatment is continued for 4 to 6 weeks, And after that, we reduce the dose of sulfadiazine to 500 milligrams 6 hourly. But unfortunately, this sulfadiazine and pyrimethamine is not available in most of the places, except in some selected places. The alternatives are you can use clindamycin 600 milligram 4 times a day with pyrimethamine and folic acid, or easy thing is to use cotrimoxazole DS. So you can use cotrimoxazole DS, standard cotrimoxazole DS, 1 tablet twice a day. So that's the option most of the centers. So we here also we are treating with cotrimoxazole DS, and this treatment is continued till the treatment and is the patient is resolved. And after the patient has the brain lesions has resolved, they are started on antiretroviral therapy, and this maintenance therapy will be continued till the CD4 count is more than 200 cells per microliter for 6 months. Then he can stop the antitoxoplasma treatment. And if the patient has perilesion edema, pressure effect due to the edema, he can use corticosteroids to reduce the edema. Next slide, please. Next, we come to another condition known as this is non-progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. The name tells you there is a multiple foci of white matter disease in the brain, which is progressive. Who causes this? JC virus. There are 2 persons who named JC virus. And how does it present? They present with subacute onset of progressive neurodeficit. Remember, this is subacute. There may be hemianopsia, loss of smell, hemiparesis, weakness, ataxia. That is, if the cerebellum is affected, you can have ataxia, or you can have a cerebellar syndrome. And if there are lesions in the motor cortex, the patient can present with seizures. Remember, there is no fever. So focal neurological sign, without any fever, advanced HIV disease, think of progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. The CD4 is usually low, less than 100. The CSF is usually normal. And if you have a facility for doing PCR for JC virus, it can be positive in up to 80% of the cases. Next slide, please. And if you do brain imaging, if you do MRI, I will be showing you a photograph. You get multiple white matter, asymmetrical, well differentiated periventricular areas. So remember, this is asymmetrical. I'll be comparing this with AIDS dementia complex or HIV encephalopathy, where you have a symmetrical white matter involvement. So in progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, you have asymmetrical white matter lesions in both sides of the brain, maybe in the periventricular areas, and they don't take up much of contrast. If you don't have access to MRI, you can do a CT scan, which will show hypodense lesions. And how do you treat? Remember, these are very advanced disease patient, and you use highly active antiretroviral therapy, and some of them may have some prolongation of life. And with that, you can do a physiotherapy, physical PMR, physical medicine rehabilitation, can be because of the weakness of certain part of the body. Next slide, please. See, you can see the picture. There are white matter lesions, asymmetrical. One side affected periventricular, another side affected subcortical. So this is asymmetrical affection due to progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. Next slide, please. We come to the next condition known as HIV encephalopathy, which is previously known as AIDS dementia complex. This is a very advanced disease of HIV. I'll tell you a story of one of our patients. We had a patient aged about 55 years, which this is long back, maybe 2006, 2007. He was referred to us from a neurology hospital of Kolkata. The patient was a manager in the bank, and he had 3 more younger brothers. This person didn't marry, and it was his responsibility. He arranged for the education. His father died in a very young age. His father died, and he did his masters. He was a manager in the bank, and he made sure that all the younger brothers, they get enough education, and they got married, and they're well settled, and they were all living together. They were in a joint family. This person suffered from tuberculosis of the lymph node. He was having fever, lymphadenopathy. FNAC was done. Acid fast bacilli was found, and he was started on anti-tubercular therapy, and this was completed. Remember, I am talking about possibly 2006, when people didn't know that if you have tuberculosis, you have to test for HIV. Now, what happened when the patient was completing the antitubercular therapy, he started behaving very abnormally. He started using very abusive language for the wives of his brothers, which is very unexpected from him. He was using very foul language. He was passing urine in the room. He was behaving badly with the customers in the bank. In fact, he stopped going to the office. So they thought that there are some neurological problems happening. So he was taken to the neurologic care hospital of Kolkata, where they did the MRI scan, CT scan, and they found his advanced cerebral atrophy. And somehow, much later, some of them thought that he must be tested for HIV, and they found him to be positive for HIV, and they immediately referred him to us. And unfortunately, this was a very sad story for them. I remember the day when the patient came to us. His three brothers were with him, and they were, their all heads are down, and they are very ashamed to know that he had their elder brother, who was like a god in the family, was found to be HIV positive. And he was, in fact, after he came to us, he was in a very advanced disease, and he suffered from sepsis, and he died after possibly 3-4 days. We tried a lot, but we couldn't save him. And that time we didn't have our critical care unit. And once he died, there is a sign of relief in the eyes of the brothers, because they could not bear the social pressure. So why I told this story, that because, so if an advanced HIV disease patient behaves very abnormally, you must think of HIV dementia complex. So they causes progressive cognitive decline, motor performance goes down, and you get behavioral changes, and sometimes you can get seizures. And remember, again, they don't have any fever unless there is another secondary infection. The CD4 count is very low. And if you do a CSF, the CSF protein is slightly raised, and you can get 0 to 20 lymphocytes in the CSF. Next slide. And if you do MRI or CT scan, in the MRI, you find diffuse, bilateral, symmetrical white matter changes. So you have to differentiate this from progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. In progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, they are asymmetrical. Whereas in HIV dementia complex or HIV encephalopathy, you have bilateral symmetrical white matter disease. And there is a gross cerebral atrophy. Of course, in a patient who presents with these behavioral changes, we need to think of toxins. You have to think of opportunistic infections, metabolic diseases, psychiatric diseases. You have to differentiate from them. But once you exclude treatment, well, you don't have much to give except from giving antiretroviral therapy, and of course, social support. That's very much important. Next slide. We do a staging of HIV/AIDS dementia complex, stage 0 to stage 4. Stage 0 means normal. Stage 0.5 is subclinical. That means there's a minimal or unequivocal symptoms, no work impairment, so you cannot make out at this stage. Stage 1, when they start having symptom, minimal intellectual or motor impairment, they can do all but the more demanding work of the activities of daily life. Stage 2 is more advanced, moderate disease. They cannot work or perform their daily activities, and they cannot, but they can take self-care. Stage 3 is the severe major intellectual disability, and they cannot work unassisted. And stage 4 is the end stage, where the person cannot move himself. There is a near vegetative stage, and there is either paralysis of the lower limbs, or there is a paralysis of all 4 limbs. So if you pick up early, when you can maybe able to do something, but when you diagnose in the advanced disease, there's hardly you can do anything. Next slide, please. So this is one of the patients. You can see there is a dilated, much dilation of ventricles in a person only 45 years of age. Next slide. And you can see there's a bilateral white matter disease, and also there's a cerebral atrophy. So this is how AIDS dementia complex looks like. Next slide. Seizures, convulsions. Well, up to 15% of your patients can come with convulsions. They can be due to mass lesions, solitary lesions, maybe tuberculoma, maybe brain abscess, maybe toxoplasma, maybe tumors, or there can be due to meningitis or maybe unknown causes also. What anticonvulsant drug to give is little of a problem, because many of the drugs have drug interactions like phenobarbital, carbamazepine. They decrease the levels of the protease inhibitors. And again, protease inhibitors replace the carbamazepine from the protein binding site, so toxicity becomes more. There are reservations about using phenytoin because it displaces the protease inhibitors and trimethoprim from the albumin binding sites. Valproic acid theoretically can increase HIV replication, but again, because we don't have much of access, we use valproic acid. But the preferred drugs are gabapentin and lamotrigine. So unless if you don't have access to gabapentin and lamotrigine, you can use valproic acid. But if you have access to these drugs, you use these drugs. Next slide. Retinitis. You have heard of CMV retinitis, cytomegalovirus disease. They may be asymptomatic. There is nothing. The patient is not complaining of anything. He has advanced HIV disease, and you have sent for the eye checkup with a request for the indirect ophthalmoscopy. Remember, direct ophthalmoscopy may not pick up the lesion because lesions may be in the peripheral part of the retina. So when with direct ophthalmoscopy, you are seeing the central part of the retina, but the disease can be in the peripheral part of the retina. So you must ask the ophthalmologist to do an indirect ophthalmoscopy, or if they're near the field of vision, they can present scotoma or decreased acuity vision. CD4 is usually very low, less than 50. And when you do a fundoscopy, you can see a perivascular yellow or white retinal infiltrates or hemorrhages, which we can describe as cottage cheese and ketchup. Of course, we know that nowadays, I don't know whether how many of you are able to go to the food cafes or the restaurants. Maybe you're ordering food at home and you're enjoying the food. So we are always, all of us are fond of good foods. Anyway, and if you do a blood culture or antigen assay, and the direct diagnosis can be done at the CMV PCR in the vitreous humor or aqueous humor. So if you can demonstrate CMV PCR by PCR, CMV cytomegalovirus in the vitreous or aqueous humor, it is highly specific. Next slide. This is how it looks like. You can see infiltrates, edema, exudates. So this is classical CMV retinitis. Next slide. How do you treat? If there's, you can divide it, if there's a threatened vision or there's a peripheral lesion where the vision is not affected. So if there is vision threatening, you give intraocular ganciclovir implant every 6 to 8 months. And with that, you give vanilganciclovir, is oral tablet available. Dose is 900 milligram twice a day with food for up to 3 weeks. Then 900 milligram daily in a maintenance dose. And for people who don't have vision impairment, with the lesions in the periphery, you give oral valganciclovir as you have told, or you can give injection ganciclovir 5 milligram per kg IV 12 hourly for 2 to 3 weeks. And this is followed by maintenance of valganciclovir with 900 milligram per day. And remember, this ganciclovir is a toxic drug. It can cause cytopenias. You have to take care of the kidneys. So please take care of that. Next slide. Many of your patients will come with problems with the lower limbs. So there can be many conditions. I'll be discussing the more common ones. There can be sensory neuropathy. There can be toxic neuropathy. There can be inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. There can be mononeuritis multiplex, that is affection of the multiple nerves. There can be polyradiculopathy, which can happen in CMV. There can be vacuolar myelopathy, affection of the myelopathies, that means spinal cord. There may be neuromuscular weakness syndrome, or there may be myopathy. I'll be discussing some of the conditions. Next slide, please. Yeah. Distal sensory neuropathy. These are very important conditions. People with advanced HIV disease can complain of pain, numbness, hypersensitivity, and if you examine them, the pinprick sensation is diminished, the vibration is reduced, and the ankle jack may be absent. The CD4 count is usually low, less than 200. And if you have access to electromyography or nerve conduction velocity, you can see there is a degeneration axonal neuropathy. And if you do a biopsy, there is an epidermal denervation. How do you treat? Give them symptomatic treatment. Gabapentin or lamotrigine can be used. And with that, you have to use highly active antiretroviral therapy. Many of the advanced HIV disease patients, fortunately, we are not seeing this that commonly nowadays. Previously, when the people were being diagnosed very late disease, many of them were complaining of intolerable pain in the legs. So that was due to distal sensory neuropathy. And similarly, they can be due to some toxins like INH can cause, alcohol can cause, vitamin B12 deficiency can cause toxic neuropathy. They present similarly painful neuropathy, and in that case, you have to stop that culprit drug, alcohol or INH or metronidazole, or if there's a vitamin B12 deficiency, you have to take care of that, and gradually they will improve. So you have to identify the culprit in that case. Next slide, please. Then coming to vacuolar myelopathy. What is happening? We have told you in the brain, you have the gray matter outside and the white matter inside. But in the spinal cord, you have the white matter outside and the gray matter inside. So there is a myelin sheath. This white matter is because of the myelin sheath. And there is a vascularization of the myelin sheath. And the foamy macrophages are coming there with the microglia. And the actions are spared. And how is it manifested clinically? There's a weakness and spasticity of the lower limbs. The patient comes with a weak difficulty in walking and stiffness. So if you examine the lower limbs, you find there's a spastic, there's stiffness, and also there can be involvement of the bile or the bladder. And the jacks are brisk because the tone is increased, the brass are brisk, and the plantar is extensor. Babinski sign is positive. And if there is affection of the sensory part, there will be loss of sensation, and in that case, the jacks may be gone. So clinical features will depend on whether the motor part is involved more or the sensory part is more involved. Next slide, please. So what are the differentiating conditions? There may be compressive myelopathy. So something which is pressing the spinal cord. What can be the causes? Tuberculosis. You know, spinal tuberculosis is quite common, and you will find patients who have tubercular affection in the spinal cord, and there's a formation of abscess, and which is compressing on the spinal cord. Or rarely there can be lymphoma or any other malignancy which is compressing on the spinal cord. Also, there can be vitamin B12 deficiency manifesting as subacute combined degeneration of the cord. That means there is affection of the lateral column, spinothalamic tract, that is loss of sensation, pain and sensation, and also posterior column signs. And rarely there can be HTLV, human T lymphocytic virus 1 co-infection. In this patient, the CD4 is less than 200. If you do a CSF, the CSF protein is raised and the cells are 0 to 10. Normally, you know, up to 5 cells, it can be 0 to 10 cells. Remember, the thoracic spinal imaging will be normal in vacuolar myelopathy. So thoracic spine will not show anything. And if you do a MRI of the spinal cord, you can get changes in the radiological changes in the spinal cord. And how do you treat? Physiotherapy, maybe role of methionine, and antiretroviral therapy will help. I remember seeing a patient of vacuolar myelopathy very long back. The patient was he had both the lower limbs flexed, and he was with us for a long time. I remember possibly he was with us for 3 months, and his father was very much caring. He used to stay with him. We referred this young fellow to physical medicine department. They came and demonstrated the exercises, and his father was very religious. He was every day when I went to see the patient, he was doing exercises. And after 3 months, this fellow was taken back home on his own lower limbs. He was walking. So this is a great attribute to the father, the tenacity of the father. So with antiretroviral therapy and physical medicine, physical measures, he recovered quite well, and he went back home walking on his own legs. Next slide. So we have discussed many conditions. We have told that you can have affection of the central nervous system, all the parts of the central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, the nerves, the muscles. Anyone can be affected. Anyone or all can be affected. And I told you that HIV disease has neurological affection throughout the parts. In fact, 70% of the patients can have neurological affection in some part of the lifetime of the disease. So you have to take a thorough history. including history of treatment with drugs. Because, as I told you, if the patient was taking a prophylaxis treatment, if the patient is taking antiretroviral therapy, what antiretroviral therapy is taking, if the patient is taking INH, metronidazole, is the patient alcoholic, all this can contribute to the disease. We talked about syndromic approach. We talked about global cerebral syndrome. That means there's a overall deterioration of brain function. There can be with some patients present with chronic meningitis. Some patients can present with focal cerebral syndrome due to toxoplasma, tuberculoma, this PMLE. Anything can cause focal cerebral syndrome. Remember, in patients with advanced HIV disease, you must refer to the ophthalmologist and request him to do a indirect ophthalmoscopy so that he can pick up presence of CMV retinitis in the peripheral part of the retina, which will be missed if you do only direct ophthalmoscopy. And as I said, whenever you are thinking of doing a brain imaging, you must use contrast. Non-contrast enhanced imaging is a no in HIV. And when you are thinking the patient has features of meningitis, or you are thinking that you have to diagnose, please get a ophthalmoscopy done by somebody who can do that. Exclude presence of papilledema, and then you put the needle. And when you are putting the needle, when you look at the physical character of the CSF, the pressure, how many drops per second, I told you that 1 drop per second comes as normal. And also how is the color, is it clear or cloudy? Make it stand for some time to see if there is a formation of coagulum, and cell for cell type, cell count, protein, glucose or sugar, ADA, if you have availability of that, then VDRL, and then gram stain and culture sensitivity, AFB stain, and mycobacterial culture if you are thinking of a tubercular process, and also CBNAT if you have that facility. And if you are thinking of fungus, do a fungal stain and culture. And also cryptococcal antigen, you are thinking about cryptococcal meningitis. You please remember that these patients, they are looking towards you for the cure. And we may not be always able to do everything for a patient, but we should try to do, we should be honest to our cause. We should be trying to evaluate the patient thoroughly, trying to come to a diagnosis. And of course, there are centers who are there to help you. So if you have any problem, you can consult with people who are maybe more experienced in HIV medicine. But we must remember that it is our noble duty to do needful for this patient. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And if you have any questions, I am very ready to take answers, give answers. Thank you very much.
So there are few. If you have any questions, please you may ask, or you can put down into the chat box so that we can discuss. Today, many student, I could not admit them because I was doing presentation. So I do apology for that. So student, do you have any questions, or you have understood well, or you know?
Well, if no one has any question, let me ask some questions. I think that may be, so I'll be asking you just some common questions, and please respond either in the chat box, or maybe you can unmute yourself and talk. So I think that will be a nice thing to do. So my first question is, what are the common causes of focal cerebral syndrome? That means someone has come with a presence of some localizing convulsions, weakness in some part of the brain. So what are the common conditions which can present with a focal cerebral syndrome? Please answer. You may unmute yourself and answer, or you can put the answer in the chat box. Anybody would like to volunteer?
Yes, focal
Great.
cerebral lesions, like patient will
Yes.
come with features of headache, then focal neurological deficits like hemiplegia, hemianopia, then seizures. And
Mhm.
the cause of focal cerebral lesion, one of them might be toxoplasmosis,
Great.
tuberculosis, then
Yes.
that progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy,
Very
and
good.
then one more that cysticercosis.
Great. And also there can be very good, very good. You have mentioned the most important points, and also there can be brain abscess and lymphoma, CNS lymphoma or metastatic deposits. Very good. I'm very happy with the answer. Thank you very much. My next question, again a very common question, clinical problem will be coming in day-to-day clinical practice. Someone please tell me the causes of common causes of chronic meningitis in HIV disease. Chronic meningitis in HIV disease. What are the common causes of chronic meningitis? Will someone answer? The common causes of chronic meningitis in HIV disease?
Sir, it can. May I speak, sir?
Yes, sure.
Sir, good evening. It may be cryptococcosis,
Good,
tuberculosis,
good.
or syphilis.
Very good. These are the more common causes of chronic meningitis, as you said very rightly, cryptococcosis, tuberculosis, and syphilis. Well, Dr. Mukherjee, I think you are speaking. So please tell me how we are going to diagnose cryptococcal meningitis. Diagnosis of cryptococcal meningitis. How do you do that?
Sir, it has to be in the clinical context. If we know that the patient has having a immunosuppressed status and he presents with seizures, cryptococcal meningitis has to be kept in mind. And ideally, the diagnostic test will be to do a CSF analysis after doing fundoscopy to rule out
Yes.
papilledema, and there preferably either the Indian preparation or the cryptococcal antigen assay has to be done, sir, in the CSF test.
Very good. So, as you said very rightly, the cryptococcal meningitis presents with chronic headache, low-grade fever. Convulsions are not very common, but they present with low-grade fever and headache, yes. And maybe there may be some features of encephalitis in the form of confusion also. And as you said very rightly, that you have to do a fundoscopy to exclude papilledema, and then you put a needle and you test the CSF. You send the CSF for, you look at whether the pressure is raised or not. You look at the cell type, cell count, where the cells may be little raised, lymphocytic, and in the biochemistry, the sugar is low and the protein is little high. And as you said very rightly, you do Indian preparation, which can show budding is cells in up to 65 to 70% of the cases. And if you do a cryptococcal antigen testing, it may be positive in up to 95% of the cases. And if you culture on the SDA, Seborrheic dextrose agar media, then it can be positive in up to, again, 95% of the cases. Very good. Someone else, can you tell me how do you treat cryptococcal meningitis? Maybe I ask someone else, and if not, Dr. Mukherjee can answer later, but maybe I would ask, because I can't see you all. So is anyone going to ask me, tell me, how do you treat cryptococcal meningitis and HIV disease? Any volunteer, please?
I think they have not remembered.
Can I answer, sir?
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Yes, please.
So,
Yeah, actually, it contains three phases, sir, like consolidation phase, induction phase, and maintenance phase.
Good. Induction,
So we give
consolidation, maintenance. Very good. Then carry on.
Sorry for the wrong order, sir.
It's okay,
induction,
okay.
consolidation, and,
Yes.
and maintenance.
Yes, yes.
So in induction phase, we can treat with amphotericin and flucytosine and fluconazole, sir. Whereas in consolidation phase, we use fluconazole, and in maintenance, we again use fluconazole with different doses. Like here, sir, in our center, we use both amphotericin intrathecally and also intravenously, along with flucytosine.
Okay, doctor, thank you. The standard recommendation which we are supposed to follow, I am very happy you have answered the question. So once you have diagnosed somebody with cryptococcal meningitis, what we are supposed to do is treat them with, though you have many choices, the option which you are using in the country context is amphotericin B 0.75 to 1 milligram per kg with fluconazole 1200 milligram per day for 2 weeks. That is the intensive phase. Then you go to the consolidation phase where you use fluconazole 800 milligram daily for 6 weeks. And then you go to the maintenance phase, as you rightly said, with fluconazole 200 milligram daily. Very good. And antiretroviral therapy we start after 3 to 4 weeks of giving starting antifungal therapy. Very good. Very good. Okay. Now, I have a patient who has come with a weakness of the lower limbs and difficulty in walking, and there is increased muscle tone of the lower limbs. I repeat, the patient has come with weakness of the lower limbs, difficulty in walking, and when you are examining, the muscle tone has increased, the jerks are brisk. So what can be the causes? So there is a weakness of the lower limbs and also increased. Yes, please.
It's a case of myelopathy, sir. I mean,
yes. So what is the common myelopathy which you get in HIV disease? You are very right.
It can be TB or it can be vacuolar myopathy because of HIV itself.
Very good. So it can be either vacuolar myelopathy or maybe compressive myelopathy, pressing from outside by tubercular abscess or maybe tumor, lymphoma. Very good. So it is either vacuolar myelopathy due to HIV disease itself, or it can be due to compressive myelopathy by either tuberculosis or tumor which is pressing from outside. Very good. My last question for today. Someone else, I would love to have answer for someone else who have not answered yet. So when and how do you diagnose CMV retinitis and how do you treat? So when and how do you diagnose CMV retinitis and how do you treat CMV retinitis? Any volunteer? Okay, anyone can answer. Any one of you. How do you diagnose CMV retinitis and how do you treat CMV retinitis? Who is going to answer? We discussed CMV retinitis towards the end. We have shown you photographs also. CMV, cytomegalovirus retinitis. So is anyone going to answer the question? Any volunteer?
Main diagnosis is with fundoscopy, sir. We do see this. There was a nice name there. I don't remember exactly. Like both cheese and ketchup.
Yes. Tomato cheese and ketchup appearance. Yes, you're very right. So you see exudate and hemorrhage. If it is in the central part of the retina, you see by a direct ophthalmoscopy. But if it is the peripheral part of the retina, direct ophthalmoscopy may not show. So you have to go by an indirect ophthalmoscopy. And how do you treat?
We treat with ganciclovir and valganciclovir.
Yes. So if it is in the central part of the retina, that is vision impairment is there. So you can give ganciclovir implant in the vitreous. And you give oral valganciclovir 900 milligram twice a day for 2 to 3 weeks, and then maintain with valganciclovir 900 milligram daily till the CD4 is recovered more than 100. And if it is peripheral part of the retina, you may not use ganciclovir implant. You may use directly valganciclovir 900 milligram BD for 2 to 3 weeks, then 900 milligram daily, or you can use ganciclovir followed by valganciclovir. Okay, thank you very much, friends.
Sir, do we have options for Foscarnet to treat the CMV retinitis?
Yes, Foscarnet is an option, but Foscarnet is not very available. In fact, what happens, doing implant is also very difficult. So what we are really doing, previously we were using ganciclovir, but that again you have to give injection. It's a toxic drug. Now valganciclovir has become available, so we are using oral valganciclovir.
Okay. Sir, one thing I want to understand is like there is a different kind of infection is appearing as per the CD4 count of a patient. Now, my question is if the same conditions, for example, even the tuberculosis is there, but over the period of time, if the CD4 count decline, then is the symptoms of a particular disease get severe, or it is a remain static. The same for other means infections also, like whatever it may be, CMV retinitis or maybe toxoplasmosis. Like suppose the same toxoplasmosis, if CD4 cell count is 250 and later on it declined like 200 or 150, then whether the severity got increased or not.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question for discussion, and this is best manifested in tuberculosis.
Okay.
See, if someone has a very high CD4 count, the type of tuberculosis you get maybe is cervical limnotuberculosis or pleural effusion, tubercular pleural effusion, or maybe cavitary pulmonary tuberculosis. See, the immunity for tuberculosis is cell-mediated immunity. So someone who has a good cell-mediated immunity, that means the CD4 is good, he will have either a limnotuberculosis or pleural effusion, or maybe cavitary tuberculosis. That means there's a breakdown, caseation and breakdown and production of sputum positive tuberculosis. And the same person, when the CD4 goes down, then he'll have disseminated tuberculosis. Tuberculosis in different parts of the body, neural tuberculosis, disseminated tuberculosis. So that CD4, this is best manifested in tuberculosis. Also, maybe in other diseases also, when higher CD4 count, you get localized disease. When it goes down, you can get a disseminated disease. But again, I repeat, the best demonstration of this happening is in tuberculosis.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for addressing this issue.
Thank you.
We sincerely thanks to Dr. Bibhuti Saha, as well as to our all students who has participated in this online teaching. And today, a few permissions I could not give because I was doing presentation. So I sincerely apologize for that. And for students, I am requesting all of you, please accept the invitations. It will help you to enter the class easily. If you don't accept the invitations, then the enter to the class is little bit difficult. And in like today's conditions, in